of anything from crack to tobacco to alcohol to French fries. As I said, one ACLU board member summed up this civil libertarian philosophy in words I've never forgotten, that as far as our own bodies are concerned, we should all have the right to inhale, imbibe, ingest, or insert whatever we want, wherever we want. I know that all of you are especially committed to and informed about the specific cause of ending the pernicious war on drugs, at least as far as marijuana is concerned. That particular cause is particularly compelling because of the overwhelming evidence that moderate use of marijuana, far from being harmful, to the contrary, can be beneficial, in some cases even health or life-saving. Thus, you don't even have to rest your case, on the principle that individuals should be free to voluntarily use substances that have no medical benefit but are merely sources of pleasure. And you certainly don't have to rest your important cause on the principle that individuals should be free to voluntarily use substances that are or may be harmful to them. Even for those who reject these broad civil libertarian principles, there is still, of course, a strong case against prohibiting marijuana with its demonstrated health benefits and disproven harms. I hope you've all read a recent outstanding book that I reviewed prior to coming here on this topic by Drs. Lynn Zimmer and John Morgan, Marijuana Myths, Marijuana Facts, a review of the scientific evidence. They examine the 20 most common myths about marijuana, which are constantly recycled in an effort to justify the current repressive and irrational laws, one at a time. This wonderful book analyzes the actual evidence and devastatingly debunks all of these myths. So in light of that kind of cogent analysis, you certainly don't need me to bolster the case for NORML's specific agenda, especially given the many experts you'll be hearing from during this conference, including Drs. Zimmer and Morgan themselves. Where I thought I could be useful is to continue what I've been trying to do, and that is to put NORML's crucial work in a somewhat broader context, so you can understand how it exemplifies the overall cause of civil liberties and human rights more generally. Your efforts are vitally important because they will help to restore to individuals not only our sovereign right to choose to use marijuana, but also our sovereign right, again quoting John Stuart Mill, to make all choices about our own bodies and our own minds. The right to use marijuana for medical purposes is often described as an aspect of the right to privacy. I believe that is the appropriate perspective. Properly understood, privacy is a broad, overarching right that encompasses or undergirds all our freedoms. It is, in fact, simply a restatement of Mill's fundamental libertarian precept. This capacious concept of privacy was most memorably set out in a landmark opinion by the great Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis in a 1928 case called Olmstead versus United States. Brandeis stressed that privacy is the most comprehensive of rights. Now, the specific aspect of this privacy that was at issue in Olmstead continues to be important today, especially in the war on drugs. That is the right to be free from unwarranted government surveillance. In Olmstead, it was through the use of wiretaps. Indeed, this particular privacy right is now more important than ever, thanks to more recent technological developments enabling even more extensive, intrusive government surveillance. When Keith was talking about, of course the government shouldn't have the right to see what books you are reading and what organizations you are joining and so forth, I hope you all know and fear, and therefore will join us in fighting against the consequences of new technology that allow the government, or for that matter, private sector snoops, to get precisely that kind of information when we are reading publications and joining organizations and engaging in intimate conversations online, as all of us are increasingly going to be doing. In 1928, wiretapping was used to enforce the prohibition laws that were then in effect prohibiting the use of alcohol. Today, the stepped-up government surveillance we all face is most commonly used to enforce current prohibition laws against marijuana and other substances. I commend to your attention an excellent report that the ACLU Public Education Department, under the leadership of Lauren Siegel, who is well known to this group and will speak to you herself, a report called Big Brother in the Wires. And it documents a, unfortunately not so well known as it should be, absolutely exponential increase of the use of wiretapping by our government. The Clinton administration has broken all records in terms of the use of this pervasive surveillance technology. And contrary to the political rhetoric and sometimes media rhetoric and public belief that this is used to protect us against terrorism and other violent crimes, to the contrary, it is mostly used to enforce the pernicious war on drugs. And the vast majority of these wiretaps are aimed at completely innocent conversations. Our government is now capturing our conversations in numbers that dwarf what the KGB was able to do at the height of its power in the former Soviet Union. It is absolutely no coincidence that this kind of sweeping surveillance is being triggered by the current prohibition laws, just as it was no coincidence that the Olmstead case, the first case upholding the government's power to use the then new wiretapping technology, was used in the context of the form of prohibition that existed then. One of the many inevitable evils that flows from creating victimless crimes through these prohibition laws is that the government, by definition, can't get evidence of the crime from the victim because there is no victim. So the government has to spy on its own citizens, including in such personal settings as our own homes and our intimate relations and confidential communications with other individuals. These are precisely the tactics that are used by the most totalitarian states. So the government compounds one type of privacy violation with another. First, it deprives us of privacy in the sense of denying us sovereignty over our own bodies and minds. Then, to add insult to injury, it deprives us of privacy in the further sense of surreptitiously snooping and eavesdropping on us. Brandeis's Olmstead opinion eloquently proclaimed a concept of privacy that encompasses not only these rights, but also, indeed, essentially, all of our freedoms. He said, "The makers of our Constitution recognized the significance of man's spiritual nature, of his feelings and his intellect. They sought to protect Americans in their beliefs, their thoughts, their emotions, and their sensations. They therefore conferred, as against the government, the right to be let alone, the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men. To protect that right, every unjustifiable intrusion by the government upon the privacy of the individual, whatever the means employed, must be deemed a violation." Of course, this powerful passage supports our resistance to the kinds of technological surveillance that was the specific focus of the Olmstead case, but this strong language also shores up our resistance to many other forms of government intrusion into privacy and freedom, including decisions by mature individuals about what they see or read, what their own young children see or read, who their sexual and domestic partners are, what religious institutions or practices they support, if any, what medical procedures they use in consultation with doctors or others to control their own health, their own reproduction, their own lives, and their own death. And last but far from least, what substances they use for whatever purposes they deem appropriate. At bottom, all of these seemingly diverse causes come down to one single overarching right: the right of mature, consenting individuals to make their own choices about their own lives without undue interference or discrimination by either the government or fellow citizens. This core conception of civil liberties is captured by a term that's often used to describe one aspect of the right to privacy, specifically the constitutional right of reproductive freedom. This aspect of privacy is often called freedom of choice. if